Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
Hello, and you are very welcome to this week's episode of Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. I'm your host, Aisling O'Rourke, and I hope you are keeping well as you tune in this week. A little bit later on, we're going to be checking in on a business that has done a sustainability audit, and it is a business that is aiming to become carbon neutral. So it's been an interesting process for them, and they had a little bit of help from Siro, the broadband company. So we'll be chatting to them a little bit later in the show. But first things first, we are going to Brazil and to the Irish Times Climate Correspondent, Caroline O'Doherty. Caroline is at COP30. Caroline, how are things going there?
Well, we're on a sort of day off. They always take a break for one day midway through a COP. So the Sunday is the day off. Now, you can be sure people, countries and officials are all talking to each other from their sort of apartments and accommodation rather than at the COP venue. But it's supposed to be a day of rest to get the heads together before the last week of COP. So you have 5 days to get some sort of, what would we call it, progress. And it's a tricky one here, actually, because this is kind of almost a standstill COP. You know, in year after year, you know, there's been agreements and there's been pledges and there's been initiatives, and the problem's been getting action on them. We're heading into, you know, seriously, you know, tricky few days of negotiations. The environment and climate ministers from all over the world all came in over the weekend. That's the standard practice. These COPs start with a couple of days with world leaders sort of setting out the broad strokes of where they want things to be. Then you have a week of officials trying to get to, you know, within shouting distance of agreement on things. And then ministers come in to try and negotiate the final kind of outcome. So ministers are in, there's still a lot on the agenda, and there's to be a big sort of meeting probably Tuesday or Wednesday, and when everybody is brought out of the negotiating rooms and sort of asked, okay, really truly, where are we at and how far are we from any agreement? And the issues that are still like up in the air are, and it sounds mad, but it is fossil fuels. You know, two COPs ago there was a breakthrough agreement because that countries agreed to transition away from fossil fuels. Very soft language still, but still breakthrough language, because they talk about greenhouse gas emissions till the cows come home, but they don't sort of say greenhouse gas emissions coming from fossil fuels, because obviously it's a very touchy subject. But really nothing's happened in the 2 years. So there are a big group of countries that are saying we want what's called a roadmap, and the terminology would absolutely do your head in at times, a roadmap to transitioning away from fossil fuels. We had the statement, we didn't do anything about it for 2 years. Now we want a roadmap. That wasn't kind of on the agenda coming into this, and there are countries that really don't want that. I mean, the oil and gas producing countries, never mind the big oil and gas producing country that isn't actually here, which is the US. So, you know, the Brazilian hosts did speak around this at the very outset, and you know, said that would be nice, but they can't do it alone. Obviously, they don't set the agenda; the countries do. So that's something. That's one thing that's kind of that's probably the big thing that's going to cause a headache over the next few days.
Now, I know there was a little bit of disturbance there from protesters. So, like, what's the scene been like so far at COP30? Because, as you say, there it's over 2 weeks long. It's quite a long period of time for all of these the protesters and the lobbyists and all the different governments to be there. So, describe it for us.
It's actually been quite relaxed. Now, bearing in mind how relaxed can a summit be when there are sort of 40,000 people milling around, and you know, and this is a huge sort of campus, almost a mini town that's kind of set up to accommodate them all, and there's just hundreds of things going on at any one time. Yes, because of where we are in the Amazon here, and you see it in the street. You know, most people, it seems, you know, if they're not immediately from the Amazon, you know, it's only the last generation. You know, this is the Amazon territory, and they did want to be, you know, a very large. They wanted to have a high representation in all the discussions, and generally speaking, they're not happy. It's a higher representation than in any other COP I've been to, but they say it's not good enough. And patience did run out a bit. So yes, there was an incident during the week there when late in the evening now. So a lot of the kind of formal discussions had wrapped up, and it has been quite a relaxed scene now. There are armed police and armed army around, but it's all been very convivial. And a group did break through, and they didn't have badges or anything to get in. They're not part of the discussions. They're not part of the observing groups, and they did manage to push through security. And a couple of people got knocked over. There were ambulances and so on. It wasn't. It probably was because it doesn't happen, and certainly hasn't happened in the last 3 COPs we held in authoritarian countries, where you did not get next nor near the venue if had a banner or a plaque or a look of trouble about you. So but they didn't really disrupt much. There was another incident then on. I'm trying to think, was it, because my mind is going, is it Thursday or Friday morning, and when there was a sit-down protest. That actually caused more disruption because it was in the morning and they all sat down. And there was a lot of mums and babies, and people just literally couldn't get in to the venue. But what happened, as I say, the Brazilians have a kind of an easy way about them. They appoint a president to the COP summit. It's like a chairperson, the chairman, he'll chair the talk. He just came out, open neck shirt, sleeves rolled up, rather than say, well, we can't, we can't give in to every group who protests. He came out and talked to them and said, can we let these people in? They're actually trying to do good work here. So it did take a while, but he went off and they had a meeting. So that happened. What was really interesting was on Saturday, there was this massive People's Summit march through the city of Belém. Like thousands upon thousands of people, a lot of indigenous people, but a lot of people with all different concerns: climate, environment, human rights, protecting the forests, and 2 government ministers went with them. The government minister for the environment and the minister for indigenous peoples. And protest is not seen as a bad thing. There was lots of singing and dancing and chanting and flag waving. So that has been referred to. That was referred to in sort of meetings late that evening, and it was presented in a positive way. Look, people are talking. People want you to do something. So that's really interesting. It's a refreshing change. It also helps where the venue is. It's very close to the city centre. It's a big city park. So it's certainly. So the atmosphere is actually pretty relaxed. It will start to get tense in the negotiating halls over the next few days.
How big a deal is it that the United States are not present? Because we know that from President Trump's previous presidency, he's obviously not, he doesn't believe in climate change, he doesn't believe in science. So it's no surprise, really, we knew this was coming, but is it having an impact, the fact that as a heavyweight of a country that the United States is not represented?
Well, I mean, if you imagine back 10 years ago when we had climate talks were in crisis and the French hosted the summit, and they said we really need to do something. We really need to add energy and impetus to this whole process. And they came up with the Paris Agreement. The US was really important in driving that home. So when the US are in good form and the US want to push for climate action, they're really influential. The upside of that, or the downside of that, is the US can be very influential in a negative way. And if they were here, as people are very nervous about how they might disrupt things. The fact they've stayed away, I think people have been able to breathe a little easier. Countries have been able to speak a little freer because they're always watching. What's the US? How's the US going to react when we say this or we say that? Now, by the same token, there are other countries, who are of a US frame of mind. In other words, fossil fuel countries. So Saudi Arabia will always make a big deal and cause problems. So they're kind of here in spirit through other countries, other like-minded countries.
Caroline, we might take a pause here and pay some bills. Caroline is speaking to us from Belém in Brazil at COP30. And Caroline is there, of course, for the Irish Times, reporting on all the developments at COP30 in Brazil. We'll take a short break and come back after these ads.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103, and we're joined by Caroline O'Doherty of the Irish Times. Now, Caroline, I know that Mary Robinson has been speaking at COP30 so far. She's someone who attracts a massive following.
Yeah, she's here on behalf of the elders, which is this, I always call it the active retirement group for retired world leaders. They're world leaders who don't want to go off and retire. They literally stay stuck into world events and they campaign, and because they're free from actually being a political representative, they can speak really plainly and bluntly, and Mary Robinson always does. She's also here with a group that she set up herself called Project Dandelion, and it's very much about empowering women, but wider communities, but at a very much grassroots level for climate action. And she's giving talks and she's taking part in panel discussions. So one that I was at today, she shared the stage actually with the former Colombian president, who's actually a Nobel Prize winner for his peace efforts in bringing the FARC guerrilla movement to the negotiating table. But she did, she immediately started. She's only just here, really, a day or so. She immediately said, not enough ambition at COP. Got to get rid of the fossil fuels, calling out the leaders and saying, you you remember Brazil did talk about this at the very start of this, sort of 10 days ago or whatever, you've got to support them on that. So she won't be, she talked about the fossil fuel lobby. We know that there are a lot of lobbyists here, and she called them out, and she said they're probably in this room. She actually said, stand up, anybody who's a fossil fuel lobbyist. So she's great. She's in great spirit. She's kind of that never say die, keeps going. So she gets an incredible following. I've seen her at a number of COPs, and I mean, people wait to see her. People hang outside rooms to see her, like veteran diplomats and young climate activists alike. She really, obviously we know what she achieved in Ireland, but she is a remarkable figure on the world stage. I sometimes wonder, do we recognise that enough?
She's actually the only person, and I'm a chatterbox and I always have been. She's the only person. I met her once in person, and I just had the opportunity to shake her hand, and I was completely speechless. I've never gotten stage fright, but I got stage fright in front of Mary Robinson. She was famous, I think, for saying she'd rather waste out than rust out when she was asked about whether or not she was actually going to retire, which I think is a nice way of looking at it. So, we, as you say, the different countries' representatives have been there over the last 10 days or so, gearing up for all the ministers to land. That all kicks off today. So what are we expecting? Like you say, it's kind of a holding pattern COP, but what's the likelihood of any, say, an agreement on this roadmap for a transition away from fossil fuels, or can we expect anything tangible out of the next couple of days?
I think the fossil fuels issue is just going to be difficult, finding a wording. I mean, the countries who are opposed to it will say, look, we agreed it 2 years ago. There is an agreement in place. We said we'd transition away. We don't want to say anything stronger than that. So that is going to be difficult. There are a couple of things that, they have set out to do. And first of all, I can't imagine, even though the Brazilian government have been trying to sort of play down expectations, I think they want to come out of this COP with the Belém something, the Belém initiative, the Belém Pact, the Belém agreement. I mean, you want your stamp to be on it. So even though they've been saying, well, no, they technically they called it a cover decision. They said, no, we're not expecting a cover decision. And this was only this last night they were saying that. I think, you do want something to say, we did this. And there are a few things, and then they're a bit technical, but actually they're really important. Adaptation is a big part of the agenda this year. Adaptation funding. What is adaptation? In an Irish context, it's when you realise that, we can't prevent the floods anymore. So we have to adapt to them. So we put in flood defences. We can't prevent the droughts anymore. So we have to put in better water storage systems all year round. We can't grow that crop system, with any certainty anymore. So to change the way we farm. You can absolutely multiply that for developing countries, because the climate impacts are already much more severe. They're much more vulnerable. And they need funding. It's so often. That's actually always about money to some degree. Countries had agreed under previous agreements, that the amount of money that the richer countries would give each year into this big pot that would be available for adaptation funding. There was an agreement over time that it would double, and I think they got to the doubling, which is around to happen this year. what happens next? Do we say, right, now we're going to, double it again or increase it by 50%, and by when? They need to come to an agreement on that, and they need to come to an agreement on what they call the indicators of adaptation. So in other words, like, how would we show that you've made progress on this? If a country says, well, we spent a lot of this money on flood defense. Well, were they only doing flood defense for, I don't know, the rich communities, or a big factory or something? Is it genuinely going to communities? It's there are lots of things. I mean, our government is suddenly talking a lot about adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
The Climate Change Advisory Council has been telling them for a good number of years, climate change is here. Ireland is going to get affected, and worse. And we still have to work on reducing the reasons why we have climate change. But we got to be doing this, and we got to be doing that. And we found that out to our cost with Storm Eo, and with finding out our electricity system is just not up to what it could not withstand those winds, and it will not withstand similar winds coming again. So we're looking at it from an Irish perspective. But that all has to, developing countries don't have the money for that. And that's a big thing. Which countries are more likely to give money for what they call climate change mitigation, which is reducing the reasons we have climate change, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, because there's potentially commercial interest there. If they help a country to go green, to go solar, to go wind, eventually they'll start paying for that power, and there's maybe a payback there. It's harder to get countries to pay for adaptation measures. Dara O'Brien, our own Minister for Climate and Environment, he's going to be on the EU's negotiating team on adaptation. So, he's going to have a baptism of fire when he comes in, because they haven't been making the progress on that over the last week that they would have liked to.
And of course, like over the last couple of days, like back at home for Dara O'Brien, I'm sure he's going to be well aware of the flooding that we had in several parts of the country, and here in the Midlands as well. Like, we saw towns and an awful lot of land underwater. So that's a stark reminder of our need to adapt. But is there much talk around the issue of migration at COP? Because there are parts of the world now becoming uninhabitable, and communities having to find new places to live. And, it's going to become that the migration issue as a result of climate change is going to have massive consequences in years to come.
Yes, it's not on the agenda, but you will find around COP what they call the green zone, which is kind of the area where groups that are not involved in formal negotiations, but you get NGOs, and you get science bodies, and you get research institutions, and you get human rights groups that gather, and they're very much aware of this. It kind of would fit under an item that is under discussion formally here, and that's called just transition. So, and we have just transition. We know that concept at home as well. It particularly came to light in the Midlands when we stopped burning peat, when we stopped actually harvesting peat, people suffered, jobs went. So but we had to do it for climate reasons. So how do you transition away from the fossil fuels without hurting people? That's where it just comes in. It has to be fair. There are people who will have to be they're removed from areas that cannot be made habitable for them anymore. Areas where the drought is too persistent and too recurrent. Areas that are lost to sea level rise. Often that's happening in a crisis situation, and there's an immediate evacuation. But longer term, there will be areas that have come under the spotlight and say, well, that area we're not going to be able to save that. We're not going to be able to save your homes there. So rather than just say, well, you just have to move, how do you make that transition in a just manner? Because the just transition will prevent the emergency, evacuations and the migration. Because if people can't see a future in their own country where there's mechanisms such as just transition, that are looking ahead and saying, what changes have we to make, and how can we help ease the burden and ease the pain for you, they are going to leave. And they are, and migration is a difficult topic for many countries now, and it's not the answer. Yes, if people want to come for a different new way, a new start in a new country, great. Many people want to stay in their own country, but the conditions just don't allow it.
And it's, the idea of being forced to move by environmental issues. it's no one wants to leave home against their will, and it's, you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy, to be quite frank about it all. You have a busy few days ahead, Caroline. The minister, of course, as you say, he's with the EU negotiating team. Is that will he be under greater scrutiny, given that we are going to have the EU presidency in a couple of months' time?
Yeah, there's two things that might happen there. Yes, we will have the EU presidency, and there will be a lot of the EU agreements on the EU's own emission reduction targets and the EU's own green agenda that they take. Once we make those agreements at an EU level, it takes time for them to actually filter through, be it in the actual regulations and the implementation of the regulations. And there will be a bunch of stuff in the next half of next year, when we hold the presidency, that Ireland can really decide to, well, we're going to drive that through now. So yeah, he has said that, like, they need to be, you need to watch and learn, definitely, and get ready for that. But even more interesting, there's a row over who hosts next year's COP. Australia and Turkey want it. Okay, now by this time, sort of days away from the end of the current COP, everybody knows, who's going to host the COP, and it's formally announced on the last day. And neither of them will stand down.
Okay.
It's remarkable. We already know who's going to host COP32, which will be Ethiopia. Well, and India is looking for the next one, but we cannot get agreement with these two countries. If they don't agree, then there's a permanent office, a permanent secretariat for UN climate change, okay? Whereas COP moves around to all different countries all year round. There's lots of activities, there's lots of meetings, there's lots of technical work being done at a big headquarters in Bonn, in Germany. And if they can't get agreement between potential host countries, it goes to Bonn. Now, it's not then what you call a German COP, as this one is the Brazilian COP. It becomes an EU COP. And Ireland will have the EU presidency. So it's a sort of, tenuously described as an Irish COP. And if that happens, Darragh O'Brien is going to need to do a lot of reading and get himself up to scratch on that, because it's no mean feat to kind of host and be at the top table of COP.
Well, we have an interesting couple of days ahead, and I wonder if Darragh O'Brien is hoping that there's no agreement so he has the opportunity to be at the lead of it, or is he praying and keeping his fingers crossed that he doesn't have to worry about that. We'll have to ask him when we speak to him on the show. He has, of course, promised to come on Let's Go Green after he returns from Brazil. But Caroline O'Doherty, climate correspondent for the Irish Times, thank you once again for joining us from Brazil. We'll be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103, and we are joined now by Caroline Hoffman of The Cube in Portlaoise in County Laois, and Amanda Glancy of Siro. Amanda and Caroline, you are both very welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, Aisling.
Now, Caroline, I might start with you first. Talk to me about The Cube. I know we've chatted here on the show before, but just for listeners who are not familiar with yourselves.
So The Cube is a low carbon centre of excellence, and we work with companies and businesses and communities across the Midlands region. So that's Laois, Longford, Offaly and Westmeath. And we're delighted to be funded through Enterprise Ireland and the Regional Enterprise Development Fund. So we just got just over €2.05 million in funding through the REDF back in 2019. So it meant we got to repurpose what was a derelict building for over 10 years and bring it back into use as a state-of-the-art low-carbon centre of excellence, supporting businesses, communities on their sustainability and decarbonisation journey. So at the moment, we're full capacity. We were delighted to officially open back in March 2023. And as part of our opening, we were delighted to announce that we were part of the Vodafone Siro Gigabit Hub initiative, which means all of our tenants and users of the facilities have access to high-speed, quality broadband that's comparable to the main urban centres in Ireland. So it means you don't have to compromise by, being based in the Midlands, being based in a regional town. There's no compromise on quality and accessibility.
And for listeners' benefit, like if you've not seen the Cube, it really is a lovely spot. I've had the pleasure of delivering a workshop there, Carol, and it really is a really nice spot and a very friendly place to work from and to do business there. Amanda, this is where you come in. So initially at Siro, you helped get on board in terms of getting that really high quality broadband speed up and running. But you've gone beyond that. So talk to us about your work with Caroline and the team at the Cube.
As you mentioned there, Siro is a broadband wholesale operator. So what that means in layman's terms is we design, build and maintain the broadband network. And then we work with the retailers, the brands that you'd all be familiar with, Vodafone, Sky, Virgin, and they resell the broadband then to end users. So we started working with Caroline and the Cube a couple of years ago, just before opening. And I suppose Caroline, as she mentioned, wanted that high-speed broadband connection, which Siro delivers to the Cube. And, you know, we're right across Ireland and right across the Midlands and Portlaoise. And then I suppose moving on to kind of the sustainability report that we're talking about today, ourselves as Siro, we have an ambition to be Ireland's most sustainable telecommunications company. We have had various sustainability reports and targets within that we're trying to reach and achieve. And obviously they keep moving because once you've done some, you have to keep doing more. So we do pride ourselves on being a sustainable company and trying to be that and trying to grow that. And then I suppose when you look outside of yourself, like no company is an island. We're all dependent on partners or people that we work with or suppliers. So I suppose as our sustainability journey has got more mature, we've begun to look outside ourselves and see how can we help and support people that we work with become more sustainable. And we do that. Currently, we have contractors from a network build perspective. And obviously, like every company, we have suppliers as well, and we work with them. And as Caroline mentioned, we work with the Cube through an initiative which is called the Gigabit Hub Initiative, which is about bringing broadband connectivity to remote and digital working hubs. And then we approached Caroline just at the start of the summer to say, actually, we work with about 25 digital hubs around Ireland, but given the space that Caroline is in as a low carbon centre of excellence, could we work with them to develop a sustainability report? So essentially, we were giving Caroline and her team at the Cube our expertise to help map and measure sustainability within the Cube. And I suppose to arrive at a point, as we've done ourselves as Siro, how good or bad are we on this journey? And, you know, what are we doing well? What do we need to improve? And how can we improve? How can we work together to improve that? So that's kind of where we came in. We're fortunate in Siro to have a sustainability expert on our team who's helped us through this process because everyone's learning all the time. So it was sort of like, from Caroline and her team, can we give you our expertise to help you, do that process as well? And that's kind of what we've been doing over the summer months. And then a couple of weeks ago, we finalised the report, and I suppose that's where we are. That's the stage we're at now.
And, you know, that report, like we talk often, I'd have people on the show talking about maybe doing a sustainability audit or the kind of supports that your local enterprise office can provide to business people who are trying to become more sustainable. Like someone said to me yesterday, and I thought it's kind of an adage that stuck in my head is, you know, if you don't count it, it doesn't count. And it's really important to sit back and assess what you are doing in terms of sustainability, or even your processes that you have in place, which actually happen to be sustainable, even if that's not why they initially were put in place. And just to get a picture of where you are, because we're all going to need, and I know, Caroline, you'll know well this as well, when it comes to CSRD and ESG, every company needs a sustainability report. And, you know, so it is important that we go down this path, isn't it, Caroline?
Absolutely. And we were delighted to work with Amanda and her team, Mariana and Catherine, who I'm going to also credit, to have their expertise and to do a deep dive into not only sustainability in the Cube, but also diversity. So we looked at the sustainability elements, but we also looked at people's accessibility to employment, work-life balance, you know, caregiving responsibilities, and how a hub like the Cube can offer high quality employment locally and still have that work-life balance. You don't need to be travelling to Dublin or Cork to get that high quality employment. So that was really important to look at as well, with a lot of people citing the better work-life balance since they've started working for companies in the Cube. On the sustainability piece as well, it was very interesting to see that the Cube actually consumes 36.5% less energy per square metre than your average office building, which is pretty impressive to us, because our building was built nearly 20 years ago at this stage, would have been left idle, and the original fabric of the building, because of budget constraints, was maintained as much as possible when we purchased the building and kitted it out for a full internal refit. So that's really positive to see. And then, little changes like we have LED lighting, we have sensor lighting, that has all contributed to bringing down the level of emissions in the building. And then we also have a BMS system, which means, it's optimized in terms of energy efficiency. And I think that's really important. And we also looked at transport as well. Now, transport, there are things we need to work on. And I think that's good with a report as well, that you have an identifying areas where, potentially you could improve upon. And a lot of people are relying on their car to get in, but I think we will see behavioural changes with that, because we have a great shared bike scheme in Portlaoise. We have 2 new bus routes as well, which people are starting to use. So I think we'll see more and more people using public transport or shared bike options rather than relying on their cars.
And in Portlaoise as well, you've got that excellent train service, which does make things a lot easier. Like, I suppose one of the challenges, say in Tullamore, which is only half an hour away, is that the train service wouldn't be as frequent as even you have the transport the directions even as you'd have in Portlaoise, just because of the geographic location of it. So then, Amanda, like when you're putting something like this together and you come into a place like the Cube, how does it work? What does a business need to provide, or, how do they prepare for you?
So you mean in terms of the sustainability report, is it? Yeah. Well, I suppose it's kind of the basics for a lot of people. It's what are the inputs? So what are you consuming as a business? And we're all consuming something. Well, even if we don't necessarily, as you were saying earlier, sometimes you do things and you don't realise you're doing it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of looking at all the inputs and measuring them, whether it's in emissions or it's waste or it's energy, and then looking at them. And I suppose there are benchmarks out there. So, a lot of the kind of the sustainability expert companies will tell you, but there are, say, the Department of Environment here would do benchmarks, so you can measure yourself to see how you're performing. There's a kind of the UK probably has more advanced benchmarks that you can use as well. If anyone's interested, I can send on links, but they have a department over there called DEFRA, and a lot of Irish companies use that standardisation as well. But yeah, there are kind of benchmarks that you can use. So it's, as you said earlier, if you don't know what your inputs are, it's cliche, but you can't manage what you can't measure, or you don't measure, and that's always the starting point. And I think people shouldn't be fearful of it, because even if you're way off the benchmarks, okay, now you know how good or bad you are, and you know how far you have to progress. So, as I said earlier, we started in Siro this journey probably 5-6 years ago, and we were far from perfect, but we knew, what are the steps along the way? So what will it be like in 12 months' time? Can I be ambitious? What will it be like in 2 years' time? And is there a larger goal? And to keep then pushing yourself to try and hit those targets. So in the case of the Cube, it was measuring all the inputs, all the energy being consumed. And then we also kind of looked at what I might say is the softer side, but I don't even mean that as an insult. I remember the first time I heard the word sustainability, and I thought it was all about being green and the environment. And I didn't really so much look at the people side of it, which is a huge part. I saw sustainability with greenness, back in the kind of Greenpeace days of 20 years ago, if you like. And I've since learned, obviously, as Caroline touched on there, it's so much more about helping people to live and work in proximity, or trying to combine the two. It's about people's quality of life. It's all the other things about quality jobs, quality environment, obviously. And as Caroline said as well, that piece around caregivers, that came out a lot in the survey. And quality work, particularly, whether we like it or not, a lot of that continues to still fall on women. And that came through a lot in our survey, that there was a lot of people who now work in the Cube or use the Cube as their workplace, who previously either had to reduce their working hours or leave their workplace altogether. And again, they were predominantly women because of that caregiving responsibilities that they had. But being able to live and work close to home effectively meant that they could stay in employment. And everybody obviously wants to be in a high quality role. So all of that kind of feeds into what is the broader definition of sustainability, which is more than just green issues, and the Cube is delivering a lot on those points as well, which is great to see,
And I think that's a really valuable point that you make, Amanda, because frequently, when I invite guests even onto this show, and it's like, oh, is that not about environmental issues? And I was like, well, it's about sustainability, and sustainability is not just about planting trees. It's about making sure that we're financially sustainable, that we're physically sustainable, healthy, and all of that. And it is about us having that mindset shift when we're thinking about sustainability, and the quality of life doing this piece of work will give all of us, and of course help then businesses thrive and become more profitable and therefore more sustainable in the long term in and of their own right. Caroline, did anything in the report and in the process of doing this surprise you?
Well, I was certainly surprised by our overall energy consumption because, as I said, the building is pretty much 20 years old and we maintained the original fabric as much as possible. What I would say is a lot of people are working from home, but they're slowly looking at hubs as an alternative because they have that sense of community. And that's a big thing we look at in Cube as well. We open up the building to community groups for events, not just businesses and education providers. And I think that's really important to share it as a community space as well. And also it brings down the energy consumption and our carbon footprint, because if you're working from home, you're one person and you're turning on the light for one person, whereas it's a lot more efficient to be in a building and a lot more sustainable with multiple businesses and individuals being based in one space. What was interesting as well, we got a number of testimonials. So people with caregiving responsibilities, people talking about their work-life balance. There was one testimonial included in the report, and he was spending 3 to 4 hours per day commuting to Dublin. Yeah. So he's delighted to be based here with one of our tenants, because it just makes sense that you have your life. And, you mentioned the train station. We're literally a stone's throw from Portlaoise train station. So if you need to go to your meeting in Dublin, you just hop on the train and head up to Dublin, and you're there, in less than an hour, which is really positive as well.
I think I'm just thinking back to the days when I was commuting up and down to Dublin. Now I live in Dublin now, but so my commute is only 15 minutes. I'm very lucky, but there was days when I was maybe 2.5 hours on the road before 9 a.m. And by the time I arrived at my place of work, I was exhausted. And I think that's something that maybe during the pandemic, a lot of people didn't think about when people were able to work from home. And we're now seeing more and more people on the roads, which is causing its own issues because they're trying to get back up. So are we going to see, Caroline, do you think, I know we've a lot of, say, digital hubs around the country, but will this type of working become more common? Might we see more and more hubs opening up?
I think, some companies have moved away from fully remote, but they're still embracing hybrid and flexible working. And I think that's really important as well, to have access to a talent pool. I would probably be critical of government that there are plans to, I suppose, have all these strategies around remote working and support people working remotely. The tax incentives just aren't there at the moment to encourage more employers and more employees to take up remote working hubs or co-working spaces. So I think that's something that governments do need to work on at a policy level, because there's great opportunities, from a green perspective, to avoid people having to jump into their car or travel to the office in Dublin. I think it's really important to look at satellite offices, which a lot of companies have embraced and supported.
So then, Amanda, back to the sustainability reporting, when Siro came online, we thought of Siro and broadband. Is this these efforts around helping and supporting organisations to create sustainability reporting? Is this now part and parcel of your day to day as a company?
Unfortunately not, but I suppose where it came from is, as I mentioned earlier, the Gigabit Hub initiative. So we've worked with 25 digital hubs around the country, and it may be something that we will look to do with some of the others. So Caroline was very good in facilitating this as a pilot project, just to see did it work out? And actually, both parties have to get something from it. And I think, Caroline can speak for herself, but I think she and her team there have definitely, there's learnings they're taking away from it. And actually, there's loads of positivities as well, positive points to say, actually, hubs are working really well and they are fulfilling sustainable purpose. So I suppose to answer your question, we may look to do this with some of the other hubs that we work with. And I suppose, if you don't mind me giving a plug, our Gigabit Hub initiative is still live. So we work with a couple of hubs every year. So that application process will be opening in January again. So if you want to look on our website, if they're interested in being the next hub that they want to work with Siro, go on the website and take a look. They'll find the links there. So I suppose in the short term, we would probably look to replicate this in one or two more of our hubs. But as I said, we're an Irish company. We've started on this journey. So if anyone has queries, we're happy to talk to anyone. Like, I suppose our ethos is, we're a small business in a small country where we should all naturally be working together and cooperating. So if anyone wants support in some measure, we're absolutely happy to help any business if we can.
And of course, if there are any employers listening and you're looking at doing these sustainability reporting and getting everything organised for yourselves, it's, I suppose, important to recognise, that actually how your employees get to you is part of this. So, you might be considering encouraging everybody to get back into their cars, but that might negatively impact your sustainability report, because I think sometimes we think in our own silos, we think about our workplace, we forget about how people get to and from. As was mentioned last week on the show when we were talking to Councillor David Gilroy about the sustainability efforts at the Puka Festival, one of the items that they mentioned was they looked very seriously at the transport to and from the festival, which I thought was very interesting indeed. Well, Amanda Glancy of Siro and, of course, Caroline Hoffman of The Cube, thank you both for joining us on Let's Go Green.
Thanks, Aisling. Lovely to talk to you.
We'll be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. I hope you have enjoyed our show this week. You might recall a couple of episodes back, we spoke to the people behind the new Climate and Biodiversity Action Group in County Offaly. Well, they are hosting a new Climate Café in Clara, County Offaly, next week. So I wanted to give a mention to it. The idea is just to come and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and a chat and to see what might be possible in Clara around biodiversity and climate mitigation measures. The organisation is working with Clara Tidy Towns and Clara Heritage Society for this particular event. Now, so the Climate Café in Clara, it's taking place on the 25th of November, so Tuesday of next week at 7:30 until 9 in the evening in the Old Bank Building in Clara. So that's November 25th, the Old Bank Building, 7:30 p.m. to 9. And that is the Offaly Biodiversity and Action Climate Café in collaboration with Clara Tidy Towns and the Clara Heritage Society. Of course, if you can't attend but you want to get involved in that particular organisation, you can drop them an email to offalyclimateandbio@outlook.com. So that's offalyclimateandbio@outlook.com. I know the group is only at the start of their journey and they are working towards having more and more events. And I know some of those events are in person and others are online. So the idea is to make it as inclusive as possible. And of course, if you are involved in a community group that is working towards climate mitigation measures, adaptation, or environmentally interested, please do get in contact with us here on Let's Go Green. We are always interested in featuring community groups that are working across the Midlands on environmental issues. If you'd like to be featured on the show, drop me an email to hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie. That's hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie. Or you can give Midlands 103 a call or go to midlands103.com and send me a message from the on-air team page there. Just look for my name, Aisling O'Rourke. If all of that sounds like far too much information, you can check out the contact details in our show notes. And of course, you can just give the station a call. I hope you enjoyed our show this week. I am looking forward to our interview with Minister Darragh O'Brien. So as soon as we can get that as on the calendar and on the schedule, we will bring that straight to you. My thanks, of course, as always, to Caroline O'Doherty, but in particular for keeping us up to date from Belém in Brazil, despite all the mad working hours that are involved at working at COP, and of course the time difference and the deluge of rain that she had to deal with, and to get to a nice Wi-Fi friendly quiet area for us for this week's show. Caroline, we very much appreciate your efforts. Don't forget, if you've enjoyed the show or if you're listening to us on a podcast app, please do be so kind to give us a 5-star rating and a review. On Spotify, you can even comment on individual episodes. But do you know what would be even more helpful? Would be if you could share the show with a friend or a family member, because the more people that hear it, the more people that know we exist. And of course, we're always looking to answer your questions and tackle issues here on Let's Go Green that you care about and that you need help in tackling. So as I said earlier, get in contact with me if you'd like to be featured. But of course, if you could give us that old 5-star rating on Spotify, we would very much appreciate it. I'm afraid that is all we have time for on this week's episode of the show. Take care, have a great week, and I'll be back same time next week here on Midlands 103 with your show, Let's Go Green.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.